All right, I'm going to show you how to do 4 traditional watercolor techniques and 4 non-traditional watercolor techniques. So the first 4 at the top are going to be, you're going to make a chart that looks something similar to this with examples, and then you'll place that in your sketchbook. The top ones are traditional, bottom ones non-traditional. So what you're going to do is you're going to get watercolor paper and you're going to divide it into 8 sections. And then you're going to label them accordingly. So wet, dry, 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 wet, wet, dry, wet, salt, rubbing alcohol, resistant, plastic. The first thing talks about the condition of your brush, and then the second is the condition of your paper. So I'm going to go through an example of each of these with you. The first one is wet, dry. So for watercolor, you always have to have water. And your paper, so you have to add a little bit of water to the paint so that way it activates the paint, okay? So in this case, wet, wet, we're using a significant amount of water. In each of these, what I would like for you to do is to go ahead and make a swatch of color. The more color that you use, the more paint you use and the less water, the darker it's going to appear. The more water, less paint, the lighter it'll appear, okay? On this one, like I said, our paint brush is wet, but our paper is dry. So make a swatch of color, do a line, maybe a loop, and then see what dots look like. All right, so that's number 1. The second one, again, we have to have paint on here, but to make a watercolor brush dry, you don't actually take all the water out, but we do take some of it. So you want to keep the paint on the end of the paintbrush, and then you're going to take a piece of paper towel and you're just going to kind of soak up some of the excess water from the actual paintbrush. Then you can go through and you can add the paint, and it's going to look different. It's not going to be quite as flowy. There you go. So that's how you do dry on dry. Dry brush, dry paper. For the next one, we're actually going to fill our paper with water, just this little section. So this is called wet on wet, which means that the brush is wet, but the paper is also wet. I'm just taking a little bit of water here, flooding the paper, not soaking it, but just making it a little bit wet. And if you look, like if you take your paper and tilt it, you should be able to see where all of the water is. It'll be shiny. Again, I'm going to make a swatch of paint, see what that looks like. Try a line, swirl. And I didn't do a ton of water, so it didn't bleed a whole lot. You can see in this example right here how the paint sort of just spreads out, okay? So then on this one, dry brush, but wet paper. So first, I need to get the paper wet. Make sure it's on there. And then I'm gonna add some paint to the tip of my paintbrush, soak up some of that water, and then, see, this one had actually more paint on it. So actually they look sort of opposite of what they normally do. It happens sometimes, but that's how you do it, okay? All right, next one. We're gonna add salt. So those are the 4 traditional, these are the 4 non-traditional. So here, I'm just gonna go ahead and add some paint. Thin it out so you can kind of see what it looks like when there's more paint and less paint. And then while this is still wet, you're just gonna sprinkle on some salt. This is regular old table salt. And you leave the salt on there until it dries. And once it dries, then you can go ahead and brush the salt off. And you'll get this nice crystallizing effect here. Okay. Next one we're gonna do with rubbing alcohol. And again, you want to apply the rubbing alcohol while your paint is still wet. You'll get the best effect that way. So there's 2 ways to do this, and you need to be careful with it that you're not spilling it. I've only put a tiny amount in each of the cups. But you could do it more controlled by using a Q-tip, or you could just put a tiny bit in a pipette and then drip it on there. When you're using the pipettes, whatever excess you have, you're just going to squeeze back into the container, and then you're going to return the lid to the container. So that is rubbing alcohol. We also have a resist, so I'm going to draw on here with a wax crayon. Apply my watercolor over the top, and anywhere that wax crayon is, you're going to see that the paint doesn't take quite as much. And then our final technique is going to be using plastic. Put some paint on your paper, crinkle up some plastic, and then you're just going to set it on there while the paint is wet, and you'll let it dry. You may want to tape the edges of your paper down to keep it from popping up, but in essence that's what we're doing here. You're going to create a chart, and then you're going to put that into your sketchbook. There you go.